So before we get started, we need to learn the parts of our instrument. So let's just start at the top. This is the scroll. It's the one thing that doesn't really have a purpose. It's just there to look pretty. Hypothetically, they could just chop it off right here and your instrument would still work fine. Everything else though on your instrument has a purpose, so that's important to remember. This is called pegs. You have 4 of them, 1 for each string. They tune your strings. Now, do not touch them. As a beginner, trust me, do not touch them. That is the fastest way to get a broken string. Eventually, we'll teach you enough that you'll be able to touch them, and I'll show you later one thing that you could use to tune, but do not use your pegs unless you're trained to do so. The pegs are housed in the peg box, that makes sense. This little thing at the top here is where the string kind of starts to be clear of the peg box, and that's called the nut. So the nut is where the string kind of starts. This is called the fingerboard, not really a creative name because it's the board that you put your fingers on. This is the neck, that's where your hand goes. Here we have the F holes because they kind of look like Fs. And now this is a very important part. This is called the bridge. So the bridge is a very skinny piece of wood that is not glued down. It is not stuck there in any way. It is only standing up because of the pressure that the strings put on. Now this is really important to know because if you bonk the bridge or rest your instrument on it or something, it will fall or it will break. And that is not a good thing. If it breaks, that's obviously you would need to go to a store. If it falls, it's possible that I could put it back up, but I might not do it in exactly the right spot. If you look inside of your F holes, you will also see that there is something called a sound post inside of your instrument. The sound post is also not glued down. It is there standing up because of the pressure of the bridge, because of the pressure of the strings. So if your bridge falls, the sound post might fall, and that's definitely something that a violin maker or music store would have to fix. That's not something I can do. I tell you this because you need to be very, very careful of your bridge. Never ever set your instrument down, bridge down. It should always be on its back. If you're a cello or bass, it's actually very safe to put it on its side when you're setting it down. And you just need to be very aware of that. Don't lay it on your lap that way or anything. The bridge is very fragile and very important. The other tuning thing I mentioned is fine tuners. Now my violin only has 1, but yours will have 4. That is something that if you use those, it just minorly changes the pitch and you shouldn't be able to break a string with that. I'm going to teach you a little later how to tune your own instrument, but that's for the record. If your parent is a musician and they're feeling brave, they still can't touch the pegs. But if they want to touch the fine tuners, that's fine. Then we've got the tailpiece. For violins and violas, we have a chin rest right here. That's kind of a misnomer because when you put it up, it's more on your jaw, not on your chin. And then back here, there's the button that holds everything together. That holds the tailpiece there. Cellos and basses will have something called an end pin that comes out the bottom as well. Now let's just talk about the bow really quick. You may notice that I didn't mention everything on page 2. I just kind of skimmed over the important ones. The bow, here's the frog, and here's the tip. There's a whole story about why it's called the frog. I believe that the name for it sounds similar to the word for frog when you speak French. Something like that. That would be a good Google search. But nevertheless, we call it the frog, and that's kind of confusing. This is called the screw, the adjusting screw. Now that's very important. When you're storing your bow, it needs to be loose. So you would turn your bow, your screw to the left, and you want it to be kind of loose like that when it's being stored. That lets your bow kind of rest. Then you will tighten your bow when you're ready to play. And everybody always wants to wonder how tight to put it. So let me show you. Usually about a pinky width in between is right for violins and violas. And can you see how there's still slight curve right there. Now, I love my bow, but for teaching purposes, I'm going to show you what not to do. Some people want to make it parallel, the bow straight, the stick straight. That's not good. What's even worse is if you do it too tight, it starts to bend the other way. I can't even let it do that for a second. That's going to be really hard on your bow. The last thing I need you to know is that this is hair. This is horsehair on your bow. And you have to be very careful not to touch it. So on the violin, you have to be very careful not to touch your bridge. And actually for all the instruments, you got to be really careful of your bridge. But for the bow, try not to touch the hair. That's very important. Everybody has a little bit of oil in their skin. And when your fingers touch the hair, that makes the hair kind of slidey and smooth, and it makes it so that it can't make a sound. So it's very important that you don't touch the hair and you don't let anybody else. So those are all the parts of your instrument. If you want to know any other ones or if you forget, just go ahead and look at page 2. Let's review playing position for violins and violas. So what you're going to do is you're going to use your left hand and grip the shoulder of the violin. Then I like to do Statue of Liberty, and then you just gently rest it on your shoulder. And remember, you've got to put your jaw on the chin rest, not really your chin, okay? Don't try to do this. We go this way. Now remember, it's on your left side. Your left hand is holding Statue of Liberty. Bring it down. So we are going to learn 2 of the strings on your violin today. The first one that we learn is D. Now D is your second to lowest string. So if you look at the thickness, we want the second one up. And it should sound like that. Now when I'm plucking, that's called pizzicato, and I like to put my thumb here and then pluck with my pointer finger. The other one that we're going to learn is the other middle one. It's A. So A is the second to top, and then D is the second to lowest. And for a while, we're just going to focus on those 2 strings. To begin with, we're going to start with one note, which is called the quarter note. Some people might also know this as a top. Now the quarter note is filled in and it has a line. The line can either be going up or down, and it's still a quarter note. The quarter note gets 1 beat. So all you need to know about that for now is that it's a steady beat. It's kind of like a clock. So if you have a bunch of quarter notes, you can't be like, you've got to be steady. 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Now, its opposite is the quarter rest. So this means that you don't make sound for 1 beat. So for example, if we had quarter note for 3 and then a rest, it'd be 1, 2, 3, rest. So that would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, rest. So that rhythm is used on pages 4 and 5 of our book. So we learned how to play D and A, and now we're using those in different combinations with the quarter note and the quarter rest. So let's play open D. It's just as easy as it sounds, like this. 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, rest. And then open A is the same thing, but on A. So I would like you to try to just play through all of this music on pages 4 and 5. It will just use D and A, and it will only use quarter notes and quarter rests. But it gets more and more complicated. For example, if you look at number 8, named Count Carefully, it's going to go D, D, rest, rest, A, rest, rest, D, rest, A, rest, D, A, D, rest. So even though it only has a couple of things, it can get kind of complicated. So try to learn all of that music and we'll review that next time. Now let's talk about the bow grip. This is something that's very difficult for a lot of people. They really just want to hold their bow like this, and they don't see why that would be a problem. And at first you can make a sound with that, and that's fine, but I kind of equate it to when you learn to start writing with a pencil. When you first started to use a pencil, you probably did it like this. I've got 3 kids, they all started with that. And your teachers or your parents kept telling you to switch to this, but that didn't make sense because you could write letters this way, you could draw things this way, but now that you're older, you can see that if you hold it this way, you can go a lot faster, you can do less movement. If you were still writing like this, you'd have to move your whole arm, every letter, but here you can just use fingers. The bow grip is very much the same. People think, this is fine, it's working. But what I'm trying to prepare you for is to play really fast with minimal effort later. So keep that in mind. You will most likely get annoyed with the bow grip at the beginning, but just trust me, if you stick with it, it'll feel totally natural. The most important part of any bow grip is a bent thumb. Your bent thumb goes right here in between this black thing and your frog. Now that can feel kind of uncomfortable. I like to say it's like a texting thumb. If you've texted, it's like that, okay? And notice that my thumb is actually touching the side of the hair. That's breaking one of my rules, isn't it? But that's okay, just for the thumb. Then these 2 middle fingers here are gonna chomp. I like to say that they have buck teeth. So it's kind of like you have this fox, here's his ears, and he's got bottom teeth and buck teeth right there, and he chomps it, and then he's tired, so he lays over. Now for violins and violas, your pinky's gonna go on top right here. For cellos and bass, since you're gonna be this way, your pinky's gonna go over the edge like that. So, bent thumb, right in there, chomp, lean over. So try that out at home. Now, if you're feeling brave, you could also try to play the music on pages 4 and 5 with your bow, now that you know how to hold it. So for example, let's play open D. Will sound like this. Rest. 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 So try that out. It's going to be a lot trickier when you need to switch between strings, and it's pretty normal to hit extra strings. So just try to learn what angle your bow needs to be to hit just one string. So go ahead and try that out this week.